Welcome. You are listening to the Be a Better Being podcast, hosted by Michelle Zellner and Sasha Berscheid. Michelle and Sasha are here to give you information and inspiration to help you live your healthiest, happiest lives. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy the show.
Greetings. Thank you for tuning in to the Be a Better Being podcast. I am Michelle Zellner, your host. Delighted to be joined today by Dustin Morris. And before we really tackle a difficult topic, I want to give a little bit of background. We are talking about Suicide Awareness Month, which is September, and that is why Dustin has graciously agreed to come on and chat with me about it. He is the executive director of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. The Association for Suicide Prevention in Alaska. And I had the pleasure of meeting Dustin when I was there a few months ago. I did a seminar for Alyeska Pipeline. They do a really amazing, robust wellness program, and they were doing an 8-week series leading up to the finale of their company participating in the annual walk that takes place. So I got to do a session on building resilience, and it was there that I met Dustin, and we just had since a really great conversation. And this is such an important topic. I think in the last couple of years, obviously with COVID and the heightened awareness of the mental health crisis that's going on, and just a little, I think, more thoughtful and open and honest conversation around suicide is something I want to continue to further talk about. And that is why we're having the conversation on this podcast today. So with all of that, Dustin, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Be a Better Being podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, it is my pleasure. And for anybody listening, I mean, if you feel like you might be triggered by this conversation, I'm just going to ask you to bow out right now. We have organic conversations. I can't guarantee where it will or won't go. But, we are going to have it's probably going to be difficult because it's a hard topic. I mean, there's just no way around that. But Dustin, give us a little bit of background on yourself. Tell us where you're from and how you came to work with the Association for Suicide Prevention.
Yeah, sure. So I'm going to just go ahead and give my full introduction that I typically do for any of our presentations or other conversations. So my name is Dustin Morris. I am the statewide area director for the Alaska chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. My pronouns are he and him, and I live and work on the land of the Dena'ina people in Anchorage, Alaska. AFSP is a national nonprofit. We do have chapters in all 50 states, and most recently we opened a chapter in Puerto Rico. So we're really excited about expanding our reach abroad and partnering with more organizations to make sure that mental health and suicide prevention stay a priority. I started with AFSP about 3 years ago, working for another nonprofit in health category. And I was asked if I would be interested in participating with this group. And I had a real aversion to it, right? Like I said, no. I was like, no way. I don't want to work in suicide prevention. That sounds horrible. Like how sad. But after a couple conversations and a news article that was published in 2019 about the current suicide rates, specifically in Alaska, and the age demographic to which that affects, it really touched my heart and made me think for a moment, if not me, then who? And so I rolled up my sleeves and said, I would like to explore this. I would like to be a part of this movement. And I'd like to really help folks and participate in our mission, which is to save lives and bring hope to those affected by suicide.
Well, thank you very much, because I'm sure a lot of people would have that reaction at first, right? I mean, as I said already, it is a really difficult thing to talk about, but I mean, your own personal journey, any challenges with mental health, and maybe has that either inspired you to go and work in this area, or is it something that you definitely can, relate to and bring to the table when you're talking to people?
Yeah, so for most of us, most people in the United States specifically will experience some kind of a suicide loss throughout their lifetime. I've been very fortunate where I have not personally been impacted by suicide with the loss of a family member or a close friend or even a coworker at this point. So I count my blessings every day for that. But so many of us are affected by that, and we want folks to know that suicide's preventable. in my own struggles, throughout my lifetime. I'm 41 years old now. There's certainly been moments where I have thought about suicide, never taken action on it. It's been, maybe just a quick thought. And that is pretty normal, I think, for most people to have moments of doubt or moments where we're just like, well, what if we just ended it all, right? And that's okay. It's when we dwell on those thoughts, when we start to see our mental health deteriorate and impact our day-to-day routines. That's really when we want to reach out for help, connect to someone, whether that's someone in your personal life or a mental health professional. But we really want to have those conversations. And through my experience with AFSP, I've learned a lot about how to have those conversations, how those conversations impact us both directly and indirectly, and the importance of having conversations regularly about our mental health. I myself struggle from a general anxiety disorder. I really wasn't aware that I was coping with this until I went and saw my primary care physician for something completely unrelated. But thanks to a screening process that they have, as soon as I entered that patient room, I was immediately asked, how am I doing? How am I feeling? Some of the ways that I responded to the questions on the questionnaire caused concern, and they just wanted to make sure that everything was okay. In addition to giving me that diagnosis, they also connected me to additional support through some therapy sessions that I participated in. And I got to tell you, if you've never been to therapy, you should go. It's great. Forget about all those things that you've heard or maybe like your worries. Just do it. Give it a try. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised with that process.
Well, I love that you highlight that point of, having fleeting thoughts or contemplating or just even thinking about it, that is actually totally normal. Most people at some point in their lives are going to think about what would it be like, or, And I don't agree. I mean, I agree. I don't think that's right there a cause for concern. It's putting a whole bunch of other information together and the physical, mental, and emotional manifestations of maybe some of the ways we are or aren't coping with the challenges of life that are going to be wanted to be taken seriously, and even just to have the awareness of that. So go into a little bit maybe for anybody, a parent, a sibling, a significant other, a coworker. What are some of the signs that maybe should have a little bit of a heightened sense of urgency if you're noticing some things either in yourself or in somebody that you spend time with?
Yeah, so we like to keep things really simple, right? So there's 3 things that you want to focus on. Or if you start to notice these things, this is time to lean into those moments and ask some clarifying questions to let the person that you're concerned about know that you're worried. And that's, how are they talking? How are they acting? And what's their general mood? You know your people better than anybody else, right? And so when they're acting out of sorts, when they're saying things that cause you concern, you know the difference between kind of general, I'm having a bad day and I'm just kind of venting, versus something that's a little bit more concerning. And our general rule of thumb that we remind people about is to trust your gut, right? So when they're saying things, when they're acting in a certain way, or they're exhibiting moods that cause you concern, then lead into that moment. Do ask those questions. Let them know and say, hey, Michelle, I've noticed that you don't seem to be sleeping or acting like yourself lately. Like, is there anything going on? Do you want to talk about it? How are you today? And you might say, I'm fine. It's just, something in the air, maybe Mercury's in retrograde, whatever it is, right? Like, you might give me just a general response, or maybe you pause and say, thank you for asking. I'm really struggling with some stuff. And yeah, maybe we should talk about that. Can we go out for coffee or whatever it is? But you want to have those moments where you can really just check in with each other, because so often, Michelle, we might talk about the person we're worried about. We're like, hey, Joe is like, really, I'm worried about Joe. Like, are you worried about Joe? And we forget to check in with Joe. So it's so important that we not only recognize those things, but we check in with the person that we're concerned about and let them know that we're worried, not in a judgy kind of way, but in a really like, hey, I care about you. I want to make sure you're okay. Is there anything I can do?
Well, and that is such a great point, because I know from my own personal experience, sometimes we we don't want to offend somebody, because if they really are okay, well, then they're going to think, well, why don't I seem okay to you, right? Or we don't want to trigger them into something, like maybe they're not okay, but me asking is going to make them even worse. So I'm not going to ask. I'm sure they're fine. And these are all reasons why we might not open up that conversation. And I definitely encourage people to role play. I've taught a lot of, mental health awareness in the workplace seminars in the last couple of years. And I mean, this topic absolutely does come up. And, we've all probably asked somebody, how you doing? I'm fine. And we just went about our day because that's the easy answer. And that is probably the answer we all hope to hear. And we all hope it's true. And when we hear that answer, we're like, okay, good. I asked. Now I can move on. And yet I think so it really requires us to go deeper, both sides, right? For us to be a little more engaged with each other, and for somebody who is struggling to feel comfortable opening up and talking about it. And that right there is, a huge roadblock that we've been talking about for years with the stigma of mental health, which I feel like we are starting to chip away at, but there's still a long way to go. And it is by understanding how to approach the conversation, like you said, without judgment. That is critical. And recognizing that everybody shows signs of distress in different ways.
Yeah.
And this, I think, is where it can be very, very tricky, because a sign of distress for maybe me is just, somebody, having a tough day to somebody else. And I think it even goes to the deeper idea of reestablishing, if not just establishing, actual human connection, which we know COVID made all of this so much worse. But even before COVID, I really think we were sort of headed in the tank on this. And it's because we live very full, active lives. We're busy, busy, busy all the time. We have social media, right? There's all kinds of reasons why we have disconnected. And so I think it requires a very concerted effort to be authentically connected with other people. Is that something that you all work and help and promote through AFSP?
Yeah, all of the things, right? So our mental health is on a continuum, right? So it goes, some days it's good, some days it's bad, some days it's all of the things, right? And that's totally okay. That's totally normal. You can have a good day, you can have a bad day, you can start off well, and then it just kind of end up in the crapper, right? Like, just that's normal. When we start seeing a consistent pattern of bad days, bad moments, bad times, that's when we really want to start to get concerned about it, right? And think about this. Whenever you're having a bad day and someone comes up to you, not only do they ask you like, hey, what's going on? You seem kind of cranky today. But then they start offering advice or telling you like, if you just did this, everything's going to work out. How that makes you feel. A lot of times, one, that makes you feel like they don't understand. They don't really care. And it kind of irritates you, right? So the same concept is true for people who are experiencing deteriorating mental health, or they're in that crisis moment. So something that's really hard for everybody to remember, it's not our job to fix it. And oftentimes that advice giving is not very helpful, right? So what we really want to do is to check in with those folks, like we said, and then be willing to listen, to hear them out. And if they brush you off and say, I'm fine, everything's good, that's totally okay. But you can continue to check in with that person. Maybe check in with them again at the end of the day or the next day or that evening. Send them a text like, hey, dude, thanks for letting me know that you're okay. I just want you to know I'm here for you if you need to talk. And maybe that's sufficient. What you want to do is signal to your friends, your loved ones, the people you care about, that when they're ready to talk to you, that you're a safe person to have those conversations with. Keep their confidence. Treasure their trust, right? Like, we don't want to promise anything that we can't. I often talk about this with kids, but it's true even for adults. Adults are so afraid that they're going to upset somebody by letting someone know that their friend is in trouble, that they don't say anything at all. And then we're left with remorse. We're left with grief. We're left with this sorrow that we should have done something when we didn't. Doesn't mean that it's your fault when outcomes go poorly, but we do internalize that as though it was our fault. Like, man, I knew something wasn't right and I didn't check in. I didn't say something. I was so afraid they were going to be mad at me, and now they're gone. So friendships will mend, people will heal, but they can't do that if they're not here. They'll get over it. The most important thing is their safety, and we have to remind ourselves that.
And I want to circle back to the point of our mental well-being is on a continuum, because this is a point I really try to get people to fully appreciate. We're all human, and every human experiences every single emotion.
Yeah.
And we all are born with certain chemistry. We are also born or we live in the environment that we have been raised in, and we've had the experiences that we have or haven't had. And it's all of that together that is going to really impact our mental well-being at any given moment. And if we have that awareness for ourselves and maybe for the people that we are interacting with regularly, it does become a little easier to identify when something is different, right? It's the change in behavior. I'm normally irritated. Well, now I'm angry and I've rage.
Yeah.
I normally have a hard time sleeping. Now I either sleep all the time or I don't sleep at all. I normally really love to go out and be active and social, and now I'm socially withdrawing. I don't want to be in front of the world. Maybe I enjoy an adult beverage or two, but now I come home and I have a bottle of wine or a 6-pack of beer or whatever it is. So I think being tuned in to the behaviors when something has changed, that is a sign that there's distress. And the person is either trying to avoid feeling the way they're feeling, or to mask for themselves or distract themselves from feeling the way they're feeling. And so those are some of the warning signs that I think we can all start to be a little more aware of, and to not take things personally. I've shared on this podcast, and I share when I teach classes, my own experience with this. And it's not my personal experience, but being married to somebody who had significant mental health challenges and absolutely had suicidal ideation. It started to feel very personal when he wouldn't just do what I said. If you just take my advice, everything would be fine.
Yeah.
And then he wouldn't do it. And I'd be like, well, you don't love me. Because if you loved me, if you loved us, you would do these very simple things. Okay, that is the uninformed, uneducated version of me who had never been around this before, ever. Never. I'd never really even been around somebody who had really big challenges with their mental health. And I'm in my mid-30s at this point. So it was all very new to me. And yet, because I understand humans and people, it also kind of made sense. And once I realized, to your point, Dustin, that it is not my job to fix him. It is not my job to save him. I have to separate myself from his outcome. It's my job to do the best I can with the resources, the information, the skills, the support that I can give to have him get to the better place.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very difficult to separate, to feel like it's my job to save this person, whether it's your child or your sibling or your friend or your spouse or your parent, or you can't save somebody else. And I think for anybody who is involved or has loved ones or people in your life, or maybe you don't even know you have somebody in your life, but it's starting to ring some bells like, oh, this is making a little bit of sense. Recognizing your role, right? It is to be informed, to be the catalyst for conversations. Very often it's literally, he just needed to know that somebody was onto him.
Yeah.
Right. That somebody understood he was in a really bad place, because a lot of times we just want to just snap out of it. Right?
Yeah.
We say these things, and these are not snap out of it types of situations. For somebody who's never really dealt with mental health issues, they might not fully understand it, right? Because it's not your reality. So just because it might not be your struggle doesn't mean it's not a struggle. And I think that degree of awareness and education is something that we can all work to be a little better at, to be curious and not judgmental, to try to learn to try to communicate, and that has to come from both sides. And I think it only comes from both sides when everybody understands what the boundaries and the rules and how we go about navigating these conversations are.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And you really did a great job of articulating a lot of what we share in our community presentations about education and prevention. And it's all of those things, right? And so if we've never experienced chronic or deep depression, we literally don't know what that feels like. And using those phrases like snap out of it, or we all go through that, just get over it, kind of things, really is not helpful. It's minimizing that person's experience. What's a better approach is to say, look, hey, I don't understand what you're going through. I've never gone through that myself, but I'm here for you. What do you need? How can I help you? Or maybe offer, like, can I go with you to see your therapist? I'll wait in the lobby, or I'll wait in the car. Can I make that phone call with you? And if you're not comfortable talking to me, is there somebody else that you would like to talk to that maybe I can help connect you with? You can't take it personal, right? Sometimes people just don't want to tell you, and it has nothing to do with your relationship or anything. It's just, maybe I don't want to tell you that right now. And there's somebody else I'm waiting to talk to, or I would like to talk to, or maybe I'm more interested in talking to a mental health professional. And that's totally okay. That's totally acceptable. Again, it's not our job to fix it. It's our job to listen. And it's our job to help connect or encourage someone to connect to care, right? Whatever that looks like.
Absolutely. And I think we're very fortunate to have a wide variety of resources. What's unfortunate is many people don't use it.
Right.
Or they don't utilize it until it's in crisis mode. So what's interesting is it's, the Foundation for Suicide Prevention. And when you and I chatted, you talked about how a lot of it seems to be more about intervention and like kind of, in crisis mode. Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the prevention piece of it. What does that look like for your association? How do you, what kinds of things do you talk about and advocate for when it comes to prevention?
So many things, right? So suicide prevention is not exclusive just to those crisis calls, right? We've helped set up a nationwide lifeline number. We've made that more accessible than ever before. In July of this year, we are advocating for 988, which is the new suicide and crisis lifeline. So if you're having mental health distress, if you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe you're just having a bad day and need someone to talk to, you can dial 988 or text 988, or go online to 988lifeline.org and you can chat with somebody to kind of just go through with whatever you're experiencing. That's a big part of what we do. Other things to do is get involved with public policy. Check in with your assemblies, your bureaus, your county leaders, your mayors. What are they doing to assist in mental health? How are they educating our kids? How are they educating the public? What can you do to get involved in that process? That's a big part of what we do at the federal and local levels. We also work with our lost survivors because they have an increased risk of suicide, and making sure that we're offering them a community of support. We work with our local resource providers, and that could be a community mental health agency. It could be a local coalition. It could be another nonprofit. We want to find out, what are they doing? How are they working in this field? And where can we support them in their efforts? Whether that's providing more information, more tools and resources, brochures, whatever it is. We want to make sure that people have access to that. The other thing that to really simplify it, because all of those things can feel a little bit overwhelming, is just remember you're a good person, and good people check in with each other, right? Like, it was told to me by one of my mentors in my professional career, is when you're thinking about someone or a name of someone pops in your head, it only takes a minute to send a note to them via text or send them an email to say, hey, you were on my mind today. I hope all is well, and that someone was thinking about you. You have no idea what kind of impact that can have on someone. Somebody who's really gained a lot of notoriety for being a suicide or suicide attempt survivor is Kevin Hines. And part of his story, he talks about how he had told himself that if just one person notices him and says, hey, how are you? that he wouldn't have made his attempt. He was just looking for that one person to notice him. Unfortunately, he went by several people and he still made his attempt. Luckily, he did survive and is here to tell his story about that, and has really influenced a lot of people for good. But it's just that simplicity of checking in with somebody. We all know somebody that we're a little bit worried about, but maybe we're hesitant to check in. And that's all you got to do. Hey, buddy, you're on my mind today. I hope you know you're cared about. And if you need anything, I'm here.
And maybe that is, the silver lining for technology. People who know me know that it's a love-hate, right? It is so easy for us to connect. There is no reason to not connect with somebody. Text is very simple. A phone call is nice. Maybe a voice text, something. It's not that hard. I think also when it comes to the prevention piece, and we can't deny that mental health, addiction, and suicide are all intricately intertwined. And not any one of them is going to necessarily mean the other is going on. But I think they're all at higher risk if there are, several of these factors in play. So when I teach about resilience and avoiding burnout, and when I talk about the consequences of not being resilient and not doing what you can to avoid burnout, I mean, suicide is a very real consequence of that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so from, again, the proactive perspective, it's take care of your human. Do all the things that Sasha and I talk about this on this podcast all the time. Put high quality food in your body. Put plenty of water in your body. Exercise. Get outdoors. Do things that just bring you joy. Have high quality interactions with other human beings. Understand the challenges that you face, your stressors, your triggers, and the emotions or the reactions that those experiences, those activating events are putting you into, knowing that is fight or flight, that is survival. It's totally normal. But then the hard work comes where you are going to realize that isn't necessary. Fight or flight's not necessary. I don't need to fight or flee anything. I just have to understand this emotion. I have to learn from it, process it, do something with it, and then I can get to a better place. And so I'm always going to advocate when it comes to suicide prevention is to do the best you can to just build a strong foundation and those foundational elements. And I know they're incredibly hard to do. I mean, when my husband was doing all the hard things, eating healthy, not putting poison in his body, and for him, that was alcohol. Exercising regularly in a healthy way, not an obsessive, punishing kind of way, which was something he would do. I learned all his tells. I knew when he was in a bad place. It was pretty easy for me to figure that out relatively quickly. But when he was doing those things, when he did have good people around him and he avoided those toxic relationships that he had a lot in his life, when he made all those hard choices, I'm not going to say his life was easy because it's not. He had a lot of stuff that he was battling internally. Mm-hmm. But it was better. When any one of those things started to slip, it was a very rapid spiral, very rapid. And so I know I've said this a million times on this podcast. I'll continue to say it. It's hard now or harder later. And I know it's difficult, but that's why we're talking about it. So that you can reach out to someone. You can say, hey, I'm in a bad place and I need help to get out of it. Yeah. And we can start doing some baby steps, right? And having those people in your world that are going to help pull you out of a bad place.
Yeah. What I think is a lot of people don't know or don't understand is that statistically, 1 in 4 of us is going to have a mental health condition at some point in our life. And that's totally normal. That's totally okay. Most people who have a mental health condition don't go on to become suicidal, but it's so critical to continue to have those conversations. So when you're checking in with your friend, your person that you're worried about, maybe they're not suicidal at all. Maybe that's not an issue whatsoever. But what you've done is you've signaled to your person that you're a safe person to talk to, that you care about them, and that when they need support, they can count on you for that. And so whatever that looks like, you really want to make sure that you're letting those people that you do care about know that you're there for them, all the while taking care of yourself. That's so, so, so important, because we can be consumed by somebody else's condition, right? Like, I'm sure you kind of went through parts of that with your journey and your husband that you're sharing your story about, right? Like, we can kind of just take it all on and just be so overwhelmed that we stress ourselves out about that. We start to exhibit behaviors or things that are not healthy, and we try to cope too. We're like, man, I've got to be so strong for this person. But you also have to have those safe boundaries and let that person know. Like, here's an example, and we teach this a lot to kids, is because they can become so overwhelmed with their friend's journey that they think that they're responsible for it. Is that, one, you're not responsible for their journey. Two, it's okay to set those boundaries and say, hey, look, I understand. Maybe I don't understand what you're going through, and it's a lot for me to process right now. Would it be okay if I helped you connect to a professional that can really work through this with you, all the while knowing that I love you, that I care about you, and that I'm here for you. But right now, this is just more than I can deal with. And I want to be here for you in the best way I can. That's really important.
Yeah, it's such great advice. And it really is something that we have to be intentional about, because if you find yourself in that situation, this isn't going to come naturally. You're not going to be like, oh, I heard this podcast and that guy said that I should do this. So whether you think this is going to be in your life or not, to Dustin's point, right? 1 in 4, it's a lot. And why not be ready? Why not be educated and informed and feel confident in your skills that you do know what to do, so that we can be prepared and ready to do what we can to support or guide, and continue to have conversations. If you do have people in your life who are of the snap out of it mindset, maybe you are that bridge that can start the conversation and say, I get it, because it's not my struggle either, but it's this person's struggle. So be grateful that this isn't an issue for you. Actually, in a corporate class I was teaching, I had a gentleman chime in and he said he feels guilty that he doesn't struggle. He doesn't have anxiety or depression or a mental health issue, and he doesn't think about suicide. And he was saying that, like, it seems like all the people in his circle talk about it and they're really having a hard time, and they don't believe him that he's not struggling. So he said he started to lie. He's like, oh man, me too. I'm really having a tough time, just to A, take the spotlight off of him, and B, to fit in. And I mean, I don't think we need to do that either. So I think just a genuine appreciation that we are all different.
Yeah.
And we all have different challenges at different times. And we can still come together to support each other, whatever way that looks like, and appreciate each other for maybe the support that somebody is offering. And it is something that, as we, I hope, as a society, continue to have more open, honest conversations, and people like Kevin Hines speak up and tell his story, and people keep doing that it does become just more of a conversation, not such a big deal about everything. Yeah. Obviously, it's a big deal, but we want to talk about it as if, because this is the truth, this has been happening since the dawn of human existence, right? Because we're humans. This is the human experience. What are some things that you can just offer as well, that maybe somebody, for a first step, like someone like me who just wants to educate themselves and be a little more aware and be sensitive to the terminology that we should and shouldn't be using these days? Is there a resource maybe on your website, or can you direct some people to some of those types of resources?
Yeah, so anybody can go to AFSP.org, and you're going to find a number of resources there. It's kind of like those YouTube holes where once you get started, like 45 minutes, a couple hours later, you're like, whoa, I'm still here and I'm still like finding all of this stuff. But there's some really great resources there, especially if you're worried about somebody. Like, what do I say? How do I have this conversation? I don't want to say the wrong thing. So we have a website called afsp.org/realconvo. And in this website, or on this website, we have guides to this conversation, whether you're the one who's struggling and you want to reach out for help, but you don't know how, or you're worried about someone and don't know how to talk about it, or there's a number of other examples of how to have these conversations. You can download them, print them out. You could have it by your side if you wanted to, or even on your phone because of the digital capabilities there. But there are a number of resources that have been skillfully outlined through research, through evidence on how to have these conversations with folks to be the most effective possible, but also not getting so scripted that it's not natural, right? Like we still want you to be you, but here are some guidelines to help you have these conversations and not lose your identity in the process.
Yeah, that's a great point. I often encourage people to take the guidelines and put them in your voice.
Yes.
Right? The words that you would use. So it sounds authentic, because clearly an authentic conversation is what we're hoping to have, right?
Yes.
Any other tips, ideas, maybe for somebody who is listening to this, who really is struggling, what's your number one thing?
Don't hesitate to call for help, right? That 988 number is there for you. It is confidential, and it doesn't matter what you're going through. You don't have to be suicidal to give that number a call. Again, you might just be having a bad day, or you're curious, like, well, what does this mean? What are my options? What are the local resources available to me in my own community to connect to further help if I need it? The folks that answer those calls, they're trained to know how to answer those questions, and they're also given local resources for you. It's important to also note, though, that where you're calling from matters, or the phone number that you're calling from matters. Our Lifeline network is not geo-targeted, right? So if you're calling from Palm Springs, California, unless you have a Palm Springs number, you're not going to be connected to someone in Palm Springs. You're going to be connected to whatever area code you're calling from. So maybe you're visiting there from New Jersey, you're having some issues, and you want to get connected to help. You're going to be routed first to your hometown where that number comes from, and they're going to walk you through it, whatever you're going through. But if you need more support, they can help you also get connected to care within your communities. There's no, I have to phrase this carefully because I want to make sure that people understand. When we launched 988, there was a campaign, a social media campaign that was against 988. It gave a lot of bad information, misinformation, and it went viral. And it was telling people, specifically from BIPOC and LGBTQ communities, that if they reached out for help, that law enforcement would be called out to the scene, they would be hauled off to jail, and that they would be mistreated because of their identifiers, right? And that's so far from the truth. 988 is confidential. Less than 1% of calls have emergency services dispatched. And the only way to do that is if you give them permission and your location, because they cannot track you down just because you made a call. So it's really important to know that. Also, as a nationwide effort, AFSP and other organizations are reaching out to law enforcement to offer additional training for mental health crisis. So many mental health crises get dispatched to 911, right? Like that's our first line of defense. We call 911, it's an emergency. We get connected to a dispatcher. They dispatch law enforcement. The law enforcement is not trained in mental health, right? They're trained for lawbreakers. And so an situation could quickly escalate and an individual could find themselves in jails or other places. So it's really important to know that we're working with our law enforcement. We're offering additional training. A lot of law enforcement is taking steps internally without any nudges to do that on their own, to make sure that they have systems in place. In Alaska, we have a program called Crisis Now that's still in its very early development, but we're creating mental health intervention officers. That's what they're there to do. They're social workers. They don't have guns. They don't necessarily have badges, but they're called out to mental health emergencies where someone needs help. And that doesn't mean that that individual is suicidal. It just means they're in crisis of some kind and they need more support. So those social workers come out to the scene, they evaluate what's going on, and they connect that individual with additional care. and maybe even get them connected to a therapist or some kind of treatment program, whatever that might look like. The idea is to avoid sending people to jail that don't need to go to jail. Our jails have become our largest mental health institutions, and that's not what they're designed for. They don't have the capacity or the ability to service the people who are struggling with their mental health. So more has to be done, more is being done, and there's a lot of good people taking those steps to ensure that access to care is being provided.
Well, and it's all really important work, and I like everything else, it takes time, right? We all wish we could snap our fingers and we have all the support and access and everything we need. It does take time, and it is going in the right direction. I know you have an annual walk, the Out of the Darkness walk. It's nationwide, I believe. Yes, every chapter hosts their walk.
We have, I think, more than 400 walks annually. And then we also have our national overnight walk. That's a 16-hour event. It starts at sundown and ends at sun up. And again, it's all about really creating that community of support and helping people know they're not alone. Other people have experienced what they're going through. Other people can relate to what they're going through, and additional support is there for them should they need it.
So if somebody wants to get involved, I would imagine the website is the best place to go. Before we wrap up, let's just touch on people who have been affected by losing someone.
Yeah.
What kind of support, what kind of outreach is there for that community?
Yeah, so we have lots of resources specifically for loss survivors. And we even have, we participate in an annual event called International Survivors of Suicide Loss Day. This is a day of international recognition for our loss survivors because so many people have been impacted by suicide. More than 80,000 people worldwide every year take their own lives. So that's about one person every 40 seconds. So there is a huge community of loss survivors, and they need that support. And so we organize events in our local chapters to support them. And then not only on this special day, but throughout the year, we also provide training for those that are interested in peer support groups. While we don't host our own, we certainly want to extend the opportunity for those interested to learn more about that. We have a program called Healing Conversations, and that's a one-on-one situation, like a peer support environment where someone who has experienced a suicide loss is connected to a recent suicide loss survivor and can kind of help them navigate the waves of grief that they're going to go throughout probably the rest of their life, right? Grief is really complex. It's hard to understand. And having someone who can relate to your experience is really critical to your healing process. So there's so many resources. I can't name them all, but those are just a few of the standouts that are available to our loss survivors.
Well, that is really fantastic information. This is exactly the conversation I wanted to have. So people know that there are so many resources out there and so many ways to get support, so many opportunities to learn. Whether you are somebody who just wants to be more aware, more engaged, be a resource and a guiding light for someone who's struggling, you are somebody who's struggling and knows that reaching out for some help and guidance would be beneficial. You are a loss survivor and is, dealing and coping with the reality of that. There is community for you, for anybody. And it really does just require every individual to do their part and to take the steps to educate yourself, to become involved, donate, support. I would imagine there are opportunities to do that via the website as well. So, this has been really great, Dustin. Thank you so much for bringing this awareness and just all the valuable information. Of course, we'll put all the links in the show notes. September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month, and so that is why we're having this conversation this month. But we can't just stop talking about it because the month is going to end, just like we don't stop talking about mental health awareness after May because it goes on. And I think these are just conversations we should continue to have. And hopefully we'll all get to a better place where we feel comfortable and confident being open about whatever side of this journey we're on or wherever phase of the journey we're on. Dustin, any last words before I officially sign us off?
Yeah, thank you first and foremost for having me on your show. And Michelle, I'm a big advocate for all of the things that you share out. It's really important, like you said, to take care of our whole person, and that's our physical health and our mental health, because they're one and the same. And for when we look at the list of leading causes of death in our nation, a lot of them are preventable, right? And a lot of them we can take steps now to benefit our overall health. So whatever that looks like, whether that's changing the way that you eat, incorporating more self-care into your daily routines, protecting your sleep habits, whatever it is, I really encourage folks to take those steps, to look for those groups of support. In the fitness industry, where, you can't tell by looking at me, and I know most of you are listening, but I used to be a fitness instructor, and I really enjoyed the community within that environment. And those are your people, right? So whatever your community looks like, tap into your people, let them know that you care, and they will do the same for you. You are not alone, and help is always available.
That is fantastic. Thank you, Dustin, for sharing. And thank you, everybody, for listening. I know it might have been a really hard conversation for some of you to hear, but I hope you will just absorb it, digest it, and then do whatever you need to do to put yourself in a good place and just continue working to be a better being.
Thank you for listening to the Be a Better Being podcast. Michelle and Sasha hope that what you heard today inspires you to embrace this journey of life with an open mind, a kind heart, and a willingness to learn and evolve. If you enjoyed the content, please help spread their message by subscribing, sharing, and leaving a 5-star review. If you have a show topic idea or would like to be a guest, please visit betterbeings.net and fill out a contact form. Until next time, go and be a better being.